On the channel today, we're going to be exploring the line between I do and I will absolutely ruin your entire week if necessary.
Today we have a story that will make your blood boil. What do you do when your own mother treats you like garbage just to pamper her golden child? You dig up a 20-year-old family secret that destroys her entire world. Let's dive into today's story. My parents canceled my plane ticket and sent message. The plane's not for you. Go on a train, loser. Then truth came out. Let's begin. I'm Alex Miller, I'm 28 years old, and my own mother canceled my plane ticket for our family vacation, then texted me, "The plane's not for you. Go on a train, loser." It was a Tuesday morning. The city of Philadelphia was still quiet, bathed in that soft gray light that comes before the sun really wakes up. I'd just finished a brutal 1-2-hour night shift in the ER at Riverside Hospital, the kind of shift that feels like a year. It was a blur of frantic energy, the smell of antiseptic, the metallic tang of blood, the constant, urgent beeping of machines that were the only thing standing between someone's life and death. My body ached with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, and my brain felt like a mess of scrambled eggs. All I wanted was to crawl into the sanctuary of my bed and disappear for 8 hours. I fumbled with my keys at the door of my small apartment in West Oak Lane, the metal cool against my skin. Inside, the place was quiet, still, a stark contrast to the chaos I'd just left. It was my haven, but it was also a monument to my life, functional, clean, but lacking any real warmth. It was a place to recharge, not a place to live. Then my phone buzzed, a harsh, intrusive sound in the silence. I pulled it from my pocket, expecting a message from the hospital, maybe a question about a patient chart. Instead, I saw my mother's name. Madeline? The text was short, sharp, and brutal. Plane ticket canceled. Chris needs the extra room for his art supplies. Find a train if you still want to come. The plane's not for you. Go on a train, loser. I read it once, then twice. My mind, sluggish with fatigue, struggled to process the words. The casual cruelty of it, the dismissive tone, the final, stabbing word. Loser. It wasn't a shock, not really. A shock is something unexpected. This was just Tuesday. This was the familiar rhythm of my life, the constant, dull beat of being second best, of being the afterthought, the inconvenience. For 28 years, I had learned to swallow the hurt, to force a thin smile, and to say, "It's okay." I had learned that arguing was pointless. It was like punching water. You just ended up tired and wet, and nothing changed. It only ever made things worse for me. But this time, something was different. Maybe it was the crushing exhaustion of the shift. Or maybe, just maybe, a wire that had been fraying inside me for nearly 3 decades finally, irrevocably, snapped. I didn't text back with angry words. I didn't call her to plead my case or ask why. I just sank onto my lumpy couch, the springs groaning in protest, and stared at the opposite wall. What was the point? Instead, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I allowed myself to feel the full, unvarnished truth of the situation, and it felt like poison. My eyes drifted to my cheap laptop on the coffee table, the screen still sticky from a coffee spill last week that I hadn't bothered to clean up. An idea, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of my fatigue. I leaned forward and opened it. I navigated to the banking website and logged into the family credit card account, the one I had access to for emergencies. For the past few weeks, a quiet, nagging suspicion had been growing in my gut like a weed. It started with a charge I didn't recognize a month ago, then another. Now I scrolled through the lines of numbers, my heart starting to pound a little faster, a nervous energy chasing away the exhaustion. And there it was, a charge from the Philadelphia Grand Hotel for a deluxe suite. On a weekend, my mother had supposedly spent 2 states away, visiting her sick sister, Aunt Carol. My hands felt cold, clammy. This wasn't just about a plane ticket anymore. This was a lie. A real, solid lie I could see in black and white. A betrayal that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with my father. My fingers, suddenly nimble, flew across the keyboard. I opened a new password-protected file. I named it Expenses. Then I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over my mother's name, the source of the immediate sting. Then I scrolled past it to my father's, Robert. He was the CEO of a trading firm, a powerful, distant figure in my life, a ghost held together by brief, transatlantic phone calls and expensive birthday gifts that always felt more like transactions than gestures of love. I hit dial. He picked up on the second ring, his voice crisp and professional, the voice he used for business. "Alex, everything all right? It's early." I took a deep breath, forcing my own voice to remain steady, clinical, like I was delivering a difficult diagnosis to a patient's family. "Dad," I said, the word feeling strange and heavy on my tongue. "Mom said you're in Vancouver. I just need to confirm. Can you send me your flight itinerary? I found some things in the financial statements that don't add up." There was a pause on the other end, a silence that stretched just a little too long, a beat of dead air that spoke volumes. And in that silence, I knew. I was no longer a victim waiting for the next blow. I was a hunter. And I had just found the trail. To understand why I didn't just hang up the phone, delete the text, and try to forget about it, you have to understand the landscape of my past. My life was built on a foundation of, "It's okay." It was a house of cards I'd been carefully constructing since I was a child, and it was about to come tumbling down. Being an ER nurse isn't just a job. It's the very core of who I am. I thrive in chaos. I run toward the emergencies everyone else runs from. A multi-car pile-up on I-95, a gunshot wound on a Saturday night, a child who can't breathe. I'm the calm in that storm. I can triage 3 critical patients at once, my hands steady, my voice even. I stitch up wounds, I restart hearts, I hold the hands of the dying and tell them they are not alone. There's a grim satisfaction in it, a sense of purpose that I couldn't find anywhere else. Then I go home to my small, quiet apartment in West Oak Lane, a place that felt more like a charging station than a home, and the silence is deafening. My life was a series of these 1-2-hour shifts, fueled by stale coffee from the hospital cafeteria and the quiet camaraderie of my colleagues. They were my real family. Jennifer, another nurse who worked the night shift with me, knew more about my life than my own mother. She was sharp, funny, and had a bullshit detector that was second to none. She saw the exhaustion in my eyes, the way I always took the extra holiday shift no one wanted. She didn't have to ask why. She knew I had nowhere else to be, no one waiting for me. "You know, you're allowed to have a life outside these walls, Alex," she'd told me just last week, as we were cleaning up after a particularly harrowing code blue. "This is my life," I'd replied with a shrug. And the sad part was, I meant it. My family life was a different kind of emergency room, a chronic condition with no cure. I was the only patient, and no one was trying to save me. My younger brother, Chris, was the golden child. He breathed, and my mother saw a masterpiece. He'd recently completed an online interior design certification, a course my parents had paid a small fortune for, and was now a self-proclaimed visionary. He was charming when he wanted to be, handsome in a way that made things easy for him, and had never worked a truly hard day in his life. He was the sun, a blazing, brilliant star, and I was the forgotten planet that quietly orbited him, useful only for my gravitational pull, keeping things from flying apart. The cruelty wasn't always as blatant as a text message. Most of the time, it was a quiet, suffocating fog of neglect, 1,000 tiny cuts that bled me dry over the years. I remember my 16th birthday like it was yesterday. It fell on the same day Chris had a regional soccer final, a fact that had sealed its fate before the day even began. I woke up with that foolish, youthful flicker of hope, thinking maybe this year would be different. I came downstairs, and the house was a whirlwind of activity. My mother was meticulously ironing Chris's jersey, her brow furrowed in concentration. My father, on a rare weekend home, was on the phone booking a celebratory dinner for the team. No one said happy birthday. Not a card, not a word. I told myself they were just busy, that they'd remember later. It was a lie I was well practiced in telling myself. They didn't. We went to the game. Chris's team won, of course. He scored the winning goal. We went to the loud, crowded Italian restaurant with the whole team and their families. My father stood up, clinked his glass for attention, and gave a glowing speech about his champion son, his voice booming with a pride I had never once heard directed at me. My mother beamed, her eyes filled with tears of joy. I sat there, picking at a cold bread roll, feeling as substantial as a shadow. I was a spectator at my own brother's life, on my own birthday. Late that night, as we got home, I saw my mother slip a small, beautifully wrapped box into Chris's hand in the hallway. "Don't tell your brother," she whispered, a conspiratorial smile on her face. "This is for my special boy." That was the moment I understood with chilling clarity. It wasn't that they forgot. It was that I didn't matter enough to remember. The unfairness of it wasn't just careless, it was deliberate. It was a choice they made every single day, in 100 different ways. So, when my mother called me the day after the plane ticket incident, her voice dripping with a false syrupy sweetness, I was already on high alert. The hunter in me was listening. "Alex, darling," she began. I could hear Chris laughing in the background, a sound that always set my teeth on edge. "I need you to do me a huge favor. Chris is having his new boyfriend Mark over for dinner tonight, and I want everything to be perfect. Could you pop over and whip something up? You make that salmon dish so wonderfully." I had just woken up. My shift had ended at 7 a.m., and it was now 4 p.m. My body felt like it was filled with lead. "Mom, I just worked a double shift," I started, my voice gravelly with sleep. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she cut me off, her tone instantly sharp. "It's just cooking, and the house is a bit of a mess. Could you tidy up before you start? Thanks, darling. You're a lifesaver." And then the click of the phone disconnecting. The old Alex would have sighed, dragged his aching body out of bed, and done it. The old Alex would have spent hours cleaning her pristine, oversized house, shopping for expensive ingredients with his own money, and cooking a meal he wouldn't even be invited to eat. But the new Alex, the one with a password-protected file on his laptop, saw an opportunity. "Sure, Mom," I said to the deadline. "No problem at all." I called Jennifer on my way over to their house in the suburbs, a place that felt more like a museum than a home. "I'm going in," I said, my voice low. "I'm going to cook their dinner, but I'm also looking for something, anything." "Be careful, Alex," she warned, her voice tight with concern. "She's a snake." "I'm an ER nurse," I replied, a grim smile on my face. "I know how to move without being seen. I deal with snakes all the time." Madeline's house was exactly as she'd said, a bit of a mess, which to her meant a few magazines were out of place on the coffee table and a single glass was left by the sink. I went through the motions. I tittied up. I went to the store and bought wild-caught salmon, organic asparagus, and a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc I couldn't afford. But my real mission was elsewhere. I started in my father's home office, a room that always smelled faintly of expensive leather and profound neglect. I scanned his desk, the drawers, nothing but corporate paperwork and old tax returns. Then I moved to the bookshelf, a floor-to-ceiling monstrosity filled with leather-bound classics my mother had bought by the yard from a decorator. She'd never read a single one. My fingers traced the spines. Moby Dick, The Great Gatsby, War and Peace. My hand stopped on a thick copy of Anna Karenina. It just seemed out of place, slightly askew. I pulled it from the shelf. It felt lighter than it should. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I opened it, and my breath caught in my throat. The center of the book had been hollowed out, a secret compartment carved from its pages. And inside, nestled in the literary grave, was a small stack of photographs held together by a brittle, aging rubber band. My hands were shaking as I lifted them out. They were old. The colors faded in that distinct way photos from the late 90s do. The first few were of my mother, younger, her smile wider and more genuine than I was used to seeing. Then I saw him, a man I didn't recognize, with dark, slicked-back hair and a confident, almost arrogant smirk. They were on a boat, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist, her head thrown back in laughter. They were at a fancy restaurant. their heads close together over a candlelit table. In every single photo, my mother looked happier, more vibrant, and more alive than I had ever seen her look with my father. I flipped over the last photo. A single name was written on the back in my mother's looping, elegant cursive, Joseph. I took out my phone and, with a clinical precision that betrayed the turmoil in my chest, I photographed every single picture. I placed the photos back in the book, slid it back onto the shelf, making sure it was perfectly aligned, and walked into the kitchen to cook the salmon. Just as I was plating the food, arranging the asparagus spears with a surgeon's care, I heard the front door open. Madeline and Chris breezed in, their arms laden with shopping bags from high-end stores I couldn't even pronounce. They didn't even look at me. "Oh, good, you're done," Madeline said, sniffing the air critically. "Smells a little fishy, but I'm sure it's fine." Chris dropped his bags with a thud and walked over to the counter, peering at the plate with a look of disdain. "Is that all you made?" Mark is used to at least 3 courses. "This is a little basic, don't you think?" I just stood there, my apron on, the heat of the oven on my face, and looked at them, really looked at them, at my mother's perfectly coiffed hair and her dismissive gaze, at my brother's expensive clothes and his entitled sneer. And for the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel hurt. I felt nothing but a cold, clear, diamond-hard sense of purpose. Wow. Talk about treating your own flesh and blood like the hired help. That text message was bad enough, but having OP cook a gourmet meal after a 1-2-hour ER shift just so the golden child can impress a boyfriend? Disgusting. But hold on tight, folks. If you think finding those hidden photos of Joseph in a hollowed-out copy of Anna Karenina was the climax, you are so wrong. The storm OP's about to unleash gets derailed by a terrifying accident. Let's find out what happens next. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A new email. The subject line read, "Re-itinerary." It was from my father. The anchor point had been set. The storm was no longer coming. It was already here, and I was standing right in the middle of it. I didn't open the email right away. I let the phone buzz in my pocket, a secret vibration against my leg. For a moment, I just stood there in my mother's gleaming, impersonal kitchen, a ghost at my own family's feast, and I watched them. I watched as Madeline rearranged the perfectly set flowers on the dining table, her brow furrowed in intense concentration, as if the fate of the world depended on the precise angle of a lily. I watched as Chris sprawled on the plush white sofa, scrolling through his phone, occasionally letting out a loud, obnoxious laugh at some video, completely oblivious to my presence. They moved through their world with an unthinking grace, a certainty that everything was, and always would be, arranged for their comfort. "Well, don't just stand there like a statue, Alex," Madeline said, her back to me. "The dishwasher needs to be emptied from this morning, and Chris has some laundry he needs done for his trip. The white load. The trip. The one I was supposed to be on. The one I was now expected to do chores for, like the hired help. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it was almost beautiful in its purity. My hand went to my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cool, smooth metal of my phone. The email from my father was waiting. The truth was waiting. The old me, the Alex of yesterday, would have argued, or more likely, he would have just done it. His shoulders would have slumped in that familiar posture of resignation, and he would have silently emptied the dishwasher, sorted the laundry, adding another layer of sediment to the mountain of resentment he carried inside him every single day. But the man standing in that kitchen wasn't the old me anymore. The man standing there had seen the pictures in the hollowed-out book. He knew the name Joseph. "I can't," I said. My voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but in the stillness of that perfect house, it cut through the air like a scalpel. Madeline finally turned to look at me, her perfectly plucked eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. It was a look I rarely saw on her face. She was not a woman who was often surprised. "What did you say?" "I said I can't," I repeated, my voice a little stronger this time. I untied the apron and folded it neatly, placing it on the granite countertop. It was a small, final act of service. I just got a call from the hospital. They're short-staffed. There was a pile-up on the expressway. I have to go in. It was a lie, of course. A fabrication built on the foundation of my life. The one thing they always believed about me, my devotion to my job. But it was a necessary lie. I needed to get out of that house. I needed air. I needed space to think, to open that email, to figure out what my next move was going to be. Chris scoffed from the couch, not even bothering to look up from his phone. Of course you do. Always the big hero, running off to save lives. Can't even help your own family for one night. He's right, Alex, Madeline said, her voice shifting seamlessly from surprise to that wounded, disappointed tone she had perfected over the years. It was her most effective weapon. Your priorities are just so strange sometimes. We do everything for you, and this is how you repay us. Everything for me? The words almost made me laugh out loud. I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked out of the kitchen, past the mountain of shopping bags filled with things I could never afford, and out the front door into the cool, damp night air. I didn't look back. I felt their eyes on my back. I felt their judgment, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a weight. It felt like fuel. I got in my car, a 10-year-old sedan with a persistent dent in the passenger door and a radio that only worked when it wanted to. I drove. I didn't go toward the hospital. I didn't go toward my apartment. I just drove, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, the streetlights blurring past me. I drove until I found a small, deserted park at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, and I pulled over under the dim, watery glow of a single streetlight. My hands were trembling as I finally pulled out my phone and opened the email from my father. It was brief and to the point, just like him. It was a forwarded confirmation from the airline, a simple, unadorned block of text. Passenger, Robert Miller. Flight, AA1428. Departure, Philadelphia, Philadelphia. 2 days ago. Arrival, Chicago, Ord. 2 days ago. Chicago, not Vancouver. The lie was confirmed. My mother hadn't just lied about a hotel stay, she had lied about which city, which state my father was in. Why? The question echoed in the silent car. Why go to such lengths? The pictures of Joseph, laughing with my mother, flashed in my mind. The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a picture so ugly, so profoundly rotten, that I could barely stand to look at it. I was so lost in thought, so consumed by the spinning vortex of betrayal and discovery, that I didn't see the truck until it was far, far too late. It came out of a side street, its headlights off, moving way too fast. It ran the red light at the intersection just ahead of me. I remember the sudden, terrifying realization that it wasn't going to stop. I remember the blinding glare of its headlights as they finally flicked on, the horrifying screech of tires on wet pavement, and a sudden, violent, bone-shattering impact that threw me against the driver's side door. The world became a kaleidoscope of shattering glass, the sickening crunch of twisted metal, and a pain so intense it was white. Then, nothing. My next conscious thought was a haze of pain and deep, disorienting confusion. I was staring up at a familiar ceiling, the perforated acoustic tiles of a hospital room. My hospital room, I could hear the rhythmic, steady beeping of a heart monitor, a sound as familiar to me as my own breathing, but this time, it was my heart it was tracking. I tried to move, but a searing, white-hot pain shot through my leg, and a wave of nausea washed over me, making the room spin. Hey, take it easy. You're okay. I turned my head slowly, every muscle screaming in protest. Jennifer was sitting in the chair beside my bed, her face etched with a worry so deep it looked like pain. Jen, I croaked, my throat raw and dry. What happened? You were in an accident, Alex, she said softly, her hand finding mine, her touch a small, warm anchor in the sea of confusion. A bad one. A hit and run. You've been out for 2 days. You have a broken femur, some internal bleeding, and a pretty nasty concussion. But you're going to be okay. The doctors here are the best. They saved your life. 2 days. I had lost 2 entire days of my life. The last thing I remembered was the email. Chicago. My family? I asked, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Jennifer's expression tightened, her jaw clenching for just a second. She hesitated, And in that brief, terrible hesitation, I knew the answer. The hospital called your mother as your emergency contact. The day of the accident, she said, choosing her words with a nurse's precision. She said she was busy. She said she'd try to come by later. And? I pushed, needing to hear it, needing the final, brutal confirmation. She never came, Alex, Jennifer said, her voice breaking slightly with an anger she wasn't trying to hide. No one did. Not her, not Chris. I found your phone in the evidence bag the police dropped off. I saw the email from your dad. I saw the pictures you took. I understand now. I closed my eyes, but the darkness behind my eyelids was filled with the image of my mother's smiling face next to a stranger. The accident wasn't the worst part. The twisted metal, the broken bones, that was just physical damage. That would heal. The real wound was the silence, the empty chair beside my bed, the chilling knowledge that I could have died in that street, and the only person who would have been there to hold my hand, to mourn me, was a friend, a colleague, not my mother, not my brother. Jennifer squeezed my hand, her grip fierce. I knew you were onto something, she whispered, her voice low and intense, and I'm not letting them get away with this. We are going to finish what you started. In that moment, lying broken and battered in a hospital bed, I felt a strange and terrible sense of clarity. The storm had hit, and I had been caught in the wreckage, but I had survived. And now, the fight wasn't just about uncovering a lie anymore. It was about taking back my life from the people who never even realized they had stolen it. The days that followed were a monotonous blur of dull, throbbing pain, the humiliating process of physical therapy, and the quiet, constant, life-saving presence of Jennifer. She was my rock. She brought me food from the outside world that didn't taste like cardboard. She updated me on the never-ending drama of hospital gossip, and most importantly, she became my general. While I was trapped in that bed, a prisoner of my own broken body, she was my feet on the ground, my agent in the world. The day after I woke up, the phone in my hospital room rang, its shrill sound making me jump. Jennifer answered it, her face a perfect mask of professional neutrality. Riverside Hospital, ICU, Nurse Jennifer speaking. Yes, he's awake and stable. One moment, please. She held the phone out to me, her eyes conveying a universe of warning. It's your mother. I took the receiver, my hand surprisingly steady. The anger had burned away the shakes. Hello? Alex? Oh, thank God! You're awake! Madeline's voice was a theatrical rush of relief, a performance worthy of an award. I've been so worried. I've been calling every few hours. I was just about to come down, but I had a crucial appointment with Chris's career counselor that I simply couldn't miss. You know how important his future is. We have to get him set up. How are you feeling? The doctor said you were stable. The performance was flawless, the concerned mother torn between her two beloved children, but I could hear the lie underneath it all, as clear as the steady beep of my heart monitor. She wasn't worried. She was annoyed. My accident, my near-death experience, was an inconvenience in her perfectly scheduled life. I've been better, I said, my voice flat, giving her nothing. Well, try to get some rest. I'll pop in as soon as I can, she said, her tone already distant, already moving on to the next, more important thing on her agenda. Love you. Click. She did pop in later that day. She stayed for exactly 5 minutes, a new record in brevity even for her. She complained about the hospital parking, wrinkled her nose at the faint smell of antiseptic, and told me I looked pale and that I should ask the nurses for some moisturizer. She didn't ask about the accident. She didn't ask if I was in pain. She just performed her maternal duty, checked the box, and left, leaving behind the faint, cloying scent of her expensive perfume and a profound, echoing silence. As soon as the door closed behind her, I looked at Jennifer. My jaw was tight. It's time, I said. Jennifer nodded, pulling a small dog-eared notebook from her bag. I have the notes you left in your apartment, the ones you wrote before, you know, about hiring a private investigator. Frank, I said, the name coming back to me from a late-night internet search weeks ago, a name I'd scribbled down on a whim that now felt like fate. Frank Donovan. The website said he was discreet and thorough. Jennifer made the call right there. In the quiet of my hospital room, she was brilliant. She explained the situation calmly and concisely, a perfect blend of concerned friend and professional nurse. She fed him the information I had already gathered. The name Joseph, the suspicious hotel charges, the confirmed lie about my father's whereabouts in Chicago. Frank's job was now specific and targeted. Find out who Joseph was and what his connection was to my mother. The next piece of the puzzle was more complicated, more delicate: the DNA. How could we get a sample from Chris without raising suspicion? The answer came 2 days later, in the form of my brother himself, sauntering into my room like he was doing me a massive favor. He wasn't there out of concern, but out of obligation. Madeline had probably sent him to keep up appearances, to be able to report back that the family was handling the situation. He was wearing a new designer jacket that probably cost more than my rent, and he was holding a ridiculously small cup of espresso. "Hey," he said, looking around the room with open distaste. "Tough break. Mom said I should check on you. This place is depressing." "Thanks for coming," I said, my voice tight with a restraint that was physically painful. He stayed for a few minutes, making awkward small talk about his new design projects and how stressful it was to pick out the right color palettes for a client's powder room. He finished his espresso in one gulp, then complained he was thirsty. Jennifer, ever the attentive nurse, immediately went to the small fridge in the corner of the room. "We have bottled water," she said, her voice bright and helpful, a perfect imitation of cheerful service. "Here you go." She handed a bottle to Chris. He twisted it open, took a few large, noisy gulps, and then, without a second thought, tossed the half-empty bottle into the trash can by my bed. "Well, I gotta run," he said, already pulling out his phone. "Mark's waiting. Heal up, bro." He was gone as quickly as he had appeared, leaving behind a faint trail of expensive cologne. The moment the door clicked shut, Jennifer walked over to the trash can. She reached in with a gloved hand and carefully, reverently, retrieved the plastic bottle, holding it up like it was a holy relic. "Is this what I think it is?" she asked, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "That's it," I said, feeling a surge of adrenaline that cut through the fog of pain medication. "That's the key that unlocks everything." Jennifer placed the bottle carefully into a sterile biohazard bag. "I know a lab," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial. "A friend of a friend from nursing school works there. They're reliable. And they take cash. No questions asked." The pieces were moving. While I lay in that bed, broken and healing, the truth was being assembled, bit by bit, in the outside world. The sense of powerlessness that had defined my entire life was beginning to fade, replaced by a cold, hard, righteous certainty. The eye of the storm was a dangerous place to be, but it was also a place of perfect, terrifying clarity. The winds were about to pick up again, and this time I would be the one directing them. The next week was the longest, most agonizing week of my life. Every time my phone buzzed with a new message, my heart leaped into my throat. Frank, the PI, was ruthlessly efficient. He sent daily updates via a secure messaging app. They were short, professional, and each one was another nail in the coffin of my family's lies. Day 1. Subject Joseph. Identified as Joseph Maxwell, former senior vice president at Robert Miller's firm, Miller Trading. Resigned abruptly in early 2002, citing personal reasons. My father's own company. The betrayal was deeper, more intimate than I could have imagined. This wasn't some random affair. This was someone from inside our lives. Day 3. Financial trail established. Regular monthly payments, averaging $5,000, from a secondary hidden bank account under Madeline Miller's maiden name, Madeline Rousseau, to an account belonging to J. Maxwell. This has been happening, like clockwork, for the past 18 years. I did the math in my head, my mind reeling. It was over $1 million. My father's money funneled away to support his wife's lover. The sheer scale of the deception was staggering. Day 5. Frank's final message was just a single, devastating sentence. Visual confirmation and background check complete. Joseph Maxwell is Christopher Miller's biological father. I read that message 3 times, the words blurring in front of my eyes. It wasn't a shock, not in the way a car crash is a shock. It was the slow, dawning, sickening realization of a truth I think I had always known in my bones, in the deepest, most ignored corners of my soul. But seeing it in black and white, a confirmed, indisputable fact from a stranger, made it real. The entire foundation of my family, the very structure of my life, was a fraud. My father wasn't just being cheated on, he had been raising another man's son for 28 years, pouring his love, his money, and his pride into a boy who wasn't his, while his real son was treated like a second-class citizen in his own home. The same day Frank's final report came in, Jennifer got an email. The subject line was just a long, alphanumeric lab reference number. She opened it, her face pale as she read the attached PDF. She didn't need to say anything. She just turned her phone around and showed me the screen, her finger pointing to the final damning conclusion. DNA Analysis Report. Conclusion. Based on the analysis of the provided samples, the probability of Robert Miller being the biological father of the individual known as Christopher Miller is 0%. 0. A perfect, absolute, undeniable 0. The number of times I had felt loved and valued by my mother and brother. I was being discharged the next day. The doctors kept telling me how lucky I was to be alive, how lucky I was to be healing so well. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt like a man holding a bomb, my finger on the trigger, knowing that when I pressed it, the explosion would vaporize everything and everyone I had ever known. That night, sleep was impossible. The physical pain in my leg was a dull, distant ache compared to the raging inferno in my soul. With Jennifer's help, I sat up in the stiff hospital bed, my laptop balanced precariously on the rolling tray table. I opened a new email. The recipient was Robert Miller. I attached everything. Frank's full, detailed report, complete with the damning photos and the labyrinthine financial statements. The PDF of the DNA results, cold and clinical. And then I started to write. I didn't write out of anger or a desire for revenge. I wrote out of a lifetime of accumulated pain, a final plea to be seen. Dad, I'm sorry you have to learn this through an email. I'm sorry for everything you're about to read. For my entire life, I have felt like a ghost in our family. I tried to be the good son, the reliable one, the one who never caused any trouble. I thought if I just worked hard enough, if I was just quiet enough, maybe one day I would be seen. Maybe one day I would be enough. I know you were busy. I know you were building a life for us. But while you were gone, the house was not a home. It was a stage, and I was not one of the actors. The things you are about to see will explain why. This isn't about the money. It isn't even about the lies anymore. It's about the truth. You deserve the truth, and so do I. Your son, Alex, I read it over and over, my vision blurring with tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry, tears of grief for the childhood I never had. Then, with a deep, shuddering breath, I hit send. The bomb was launched. I am literally getting goosebumps reading this. Can you even fathom being in a near-fatal car crash, waking up 2 days later, and finding out your own mother couldn't be bothered to visit because of a career counselor appointment for her golden boy? But OP didn't just get mad. OP got data, $1 million embezzled, a 0% DNA match. The email has been sent to the dad. Brace yourselves, because the fallout is absolutely nuclear. Here's how it all ends. 2 days later, I was back in my own apartment, my leg propped up on a stack of pillows, when my father called. His voice was raw, scraped bare, a sound I had never heard from him before. I'm on my way back, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I'm on a plane. Don't do anything. Don't talk to them. Just wait for me. He didn't need to tell me. I had no intention of ever speaking to them again. My father arrived the next evening. He didn't come to my apartment. He went straight home. I know what happened next, because he told me later, his voice flat and hollow with a kind of exhausted shock. He walked into the house to find Madeline and Chris in the living room, laughing at some reality show on the massive flat-screen TV. They looked up, surprised to see him. "Robert, you're back early," Madeline said, jumping up to kiss him. He turned his head, and her lips met the empty air. "Sit down, Madeline," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Both of you." He didn't shout. He didn't rage. He just walked over to the expensive marble coffee table and placed a single photograph on its polished surface. It was the one of Madeline and Joseph on the boat, their arms around each other, laughing into the sun. "Madeline," he began, his voice low and controlled, each word a carefully placed stone. "Who is Joseph Maxwell?" Madeline's face went white, a flicker of pure panic in her eyes before the mask of indignation slammed down. I don't know what you're talking about. That's just an old friend from work. Years ago." My father placed a second piece of paper on the table. It was a copy of the hotel bill from the Philadelphia Grand. "A friend you share a deluxe hotel suite with while I'm away on business." "Robert, this is a misunderstanding. Someone is trying to cause trouble," she stammered, looking at Chris for support. Chris just looked confused, annoyed that his show had been interrupted. "Is it?" my father continued, his voice dropping even lower. He laid out the bank statements one by one, a paper trail of his own money being funneled to another man. "Is it a misunderstanding that you have been paying him every single month for 18 years? Madeline started to cry then, the fake, theatrical sobs of a bad actress caught in a lie. "He was blackmailing me. It was a mistake from a long, long time ago. I was scared." Chris, finally understanding that something was terribly wrong, jumped to his mother's defense. "Dad, stop it! You're upsetting her. Whatever it is, I'm sure she had a good reason." My father didn't even look at him. His eyes, cold as chips of ice, were locked on his wife. "A mistake?" he whispered. "A mistake that lasted 20 years?" He paused, letting the silence hang in the air, thick and suffocating. The laugh track from the TV seemed to mock them. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out the final piece of paper. The DNA report. He didn't throw it. He placed it gently on top of the pile of evidence, the final, irrefutable proof. "Then explain this," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but it echoed in the room like a gunshot. "Explain why my son is not my son." The room fell utterly silent. The television droned on in the background, a canned voice selling something no one wanted. Madeline stopped crying instantly. Her face crumpled, not in sadness, but in the ugly, naked terror of being completely and irrevocably caught. Chris stared at the paper, his mouth hanging open, the color draining from his face as the words finally registered. The golden boy, the center of their universe, was a fraud, and their world had just ended. The bomb had detonated, and the fallout was just beginning. The explosion that ripped through my family's life wasn't loud and fiery. It was a silent, devastating shockwave that leveled everything in its path, leaving nothing but rubble. In the immediate aftermath of the confrontation, my father acted with the same ruthless, cold-blooded efficiency he applied to a hostile takeover in the business world. While Madeline and Chris were still reeling, staring at the papers on the coffee table as if they were a death sentence, my father made a phone call. He didn't leave the room. He stood right there, in the center of the life they had built on lies, and dismantled it brick by brick. "Davis," he said into the phone, his voice like ice. "It's Robert Miller. I need you to file for divorce. Immediately. Cite adultery and fraud. And I want them out of the house. Both of them. They have 24 hours. I can only imagine the scene. The way Madeline's feigned tears must have dried up, replaced by a look of pure, panicked horror. The way Chris, the golden child, the boy who had never been denied anything in his life, must have realized that the sun he'd orbited his entire life had just been extinguished. The power dynamic, the one that had governed my entire existence, hadn't just shifted. It had been inverted in a single brutal moment. The next day, a legal courier delivered a thick manila envelope to their door. It contained a restraining order, a formal notice of eviction, and a preliminary divorce filing that was as brutal as it was precise. The locks on the house were changed that afternoon. Madeline and Chris were forced to pack what they could into a few expensive suitcases and leave the home Chris had grown up in, the home I had never truly been welcome in. They were, for the first time in their lives, utterly and completely on their own. But that's their story. My story, the one that mattered to me, took a different, quieter turn. The day after he threw them out, my father came to my apartment. It was the first time he had ever set foot inside. He looked utterly out of place in my small, sparsely furnished living room, his expensive tailored suit looking too formal and rigid against my second-hand furniture. He looked older than I had ever seen him, the lines around his eyes etched deeper, his broad shoulders slumped with a weight that had nothing to do with business. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked over to the single window and looked out at the unremarkable street below, at the kids playing stickball and the old woman watering her plants. "I went to see him," my father said finally, his back still to me, his voice flat and hollow. "Joseph Maxwell. I found his address. I had to see the man." I waited, my leg propped up on a stack of pillows, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "He's a coward," my father said, his voice thick with a contempt that was almost tangible, a pathetic little coward. He saw me at his door and practically slammed it in my face. Said it was all in the past, said he wanted nothing to do with any of it. Nothing to do with Chris. He finally turned around then, and his eyes met mine. They were filled with a pain so profound, so raw, it was almost physical. It wasn't just the anger of a betrayed husband. It was the hollow, echoing grief of a father who had lost a son, even a son who was never truly his to begin with. He walked over and sat on the edge of the worn-out armchair across from me, the one I'd found on the curb. He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly between his knees, and for the first time in my life, he looked at me. Really looked at me, not through me. "I'm sorry, Alex," he said, his voice cracking on my name. The words were quiet, but they landed with the force of a thunderclap in the small room. "God, I am so sorry." Tears, actual tears, welled in his eyes, tears I never thought a man like him was capable of shedding. "I was so busy," he choked out. "So focused on building an empire, on providing. I thought that was what a father was supposed to do. I bought the house, I paid for the schools, I funded the vacations, and I wasn't there. I wasn't here." He gestured around my small apartment, at the life I had built for myself, completely separate from him, a life he knew nothing about. "I let this happen," he whispered, his voice raw with a self-recrimination that was agonizing to witness. "I was so blind. I saw that she favored him. I saw that you were quiet. You were always so quiet. I told myself it was just how kids are, that you were the independent one, the strong one, but it was a lie, I told myself, because it was easier than facing the truth that my home was broken. I failed you, Alex. As a father, I failed you." He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment in the space between us before it rested on my shoulder. It was a gesture so foreign, so unexpected, that it broke through the thick, scar-tissued wall I had built around my heart. And I started to cry. Not for the pain of the past, not for the betrayal, but for the father I was finally meeting for the very first time. A broken man just like me. In that small, shabby apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of our family, we began to heal. It wasn't a grand reunion. It wasn't a movie moment. It was something quieter, more fragile, and infinitely more real. It was a start. 6 months later, the gritty, familiar Philadelphia skyline was just a memory, a picture in a box I hadn't unpacked yet. We were in Boston. The air was different here, crisp and clean, carrying the briny scent of the ocean that felt like it was washing the past away. Our new apartment, because the first time in the South End, was smaller than the house I grew up in, but it was filled with light, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was home. It was our home, a place we were building together from the ground up. My father had done something I never thought possible. He'd stepped back from the relentless climb. He was offered a major executive position at a prestigious firm in Boston, a step up even for him, the kind of job he would have sacrificed anything for in his old life. He turned it down without a second thought. Instead, he took a consulting role, one with regular hours and no international travel. "I've spent enough time building empires," he'd told me one evening, as we were awkwardly trying to assemble a bookshelf from IKEA. "It's time I build a life. Our evenings were quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet, not the empty, lonely silence of my childhood. We'd cook dinner together, a clumsy dance in the small kitchen, me teaching him how to chop an onion without crying, him teaching me the difference between a stock and a bond. I'd started working at Mass General, and the ER there was just as chaotic as in Philly. I'd come home and tell him stories about the funny old man who came in with a fork stuck in his toaster, about the young couple who had their first baby in the back of a taxi. He'd listen, really listen, asking questions, his face a mixture of pride and genuine concern. We were two strangers learning the language of family, one stilted, heartfelt conversation at a time. We didn't talk much about Madeline and Chris. We didn't have to. The consequences of their actions had played out with a kind of grim, inevitable logic, like a law of physics. The universe, it seemed, had a way of balancing the books. I saw it online once, by accident. A friend from Philly, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, had shared a post on Facebook. It was a picture of Madeline, taken surreptitiously by a disgruntled customer. She was working at a high-end retail store in King of Prussia, her face a mask of strained patience and barely concealed contempt, her name tag pinned crookedly to her uniform. The caption read, "Worst customer service ever from this miserable woman at Nordstrom. Acted like I was bothering her by trying to spend money." The comments were brutal, a pile-on of public shaming she could never have imagined in her old life of private lunches and charity galas. For the first time in 30 years, she had to work. She had to answer to someone. The world no longer revolved around her. Chris's fall from grace was even harder, and far more public. His new boyfriend, Mark, the one he'd been so eager to impress with his family's wealth, had dropped him the second the money dried up. Mark had posted a scathing story on Instagram, a picture of Chris looking forlorn with the caption, "Clout chaser got what he deserved. Turns out mommy and daddy's money wasn't real. Number loser." It was cruel and petty, but it was also the unvarnished truth. Chris, who had built his entire identity on a foundation of privilege and lies, was left with nothing. He tried to contact Joseph, his biological father, but the man, a coward to the last, had blocked his number, wanting no part of the son he had abandoned decades ago. Their downfall didn't bring me the rush of satisfaction I thought it would. It just felt empty, a pathetic end to a pathetic story. My focus was on my own healing, which was a slower, more complicated process than a broken bone. One rainy Saturday, while unpacking the last of my old boxes from Philly, the ones filled with the debris of my youth, I found something I'd forgotten I even had, a journal from when I was a teenager. It was a cheap, spiral-bound notebook, its cover adorned with the faded logo of a band I no longer listened to. Curiosity got the better of me. I sat on the floor of my new room and opened it. The pages were filled with the angsty, clumsy handwriting of a 16-year-old boy trying to figure out the world. I read about my frustrations at school, my hopeless crush on a girl in my chemistry class, and my desperate dreams of getting out of Philadelphia. But then I found an entry that made me stop breathing, the words leaping off the page and hitting me with the force of a physical blow. October 14th. It was my birthday today. Nobody remembered. Mom and Dad were all about Chris's soccer game. He got a new Xbox. I saw Mom give it to him in the garage when she thought I wasn't looking. She told him not to tell me. Why? Why does she always do that? It feels like a secret. Like the whole family is a secret, and I'm the only one who doesn't know the password. Sometimes I look at Chris, and he doesn't look like Dad at all. He has Mom's eyes, but the rest of him... But his smile, the way he stands, it's like he's a stranger. I feel like I'm the only one who sees it. Or maybe I'm just going crazy. I closed the journal, my hands trembling slightly. It was all there, the doubt, the suspicion, the profound gut-wrenching feeling of being an outsider looking in. I hadn't needed a PI or a DNA test. A part of me, a deep, intuitive part of me, had known the truth all along. I had just been too scared, too beaten down, too desperate for their love to ever admit it to myself. The betrayal wasn't just that my mother had lied. It was that she had forced me to live inside that lie with her. She had made me doubt my own perceptions, my own reality for my entire life. The healing wasn't just about getting away from her, it was about learning to trust myself again. I put the journal back in the box. It wasn't a source of pain anymore. It was a map, a testament to the boy who had survived, the boy who had known the truth long before the man had the courage to go out and find it. The first snow of the season was falling over Boston, the big, fat, lazy flakes sticking to the window of our apartment, muffling the sounds of the city into a gentle hush. I was sitting in the big, comfortable armchair by the window, a cup of hot coffee warming my hands, watching the world turn clean and white. My father was in the kitchen, humming completely off-key as he tried to figure out a new pancake recipe he'd found online. It was a peaceful, wonderfully ordinary Sunday morning. It was perfect. The mail had come earlier, a small stack of bills and junk mail that I'd left on the narrow entryway table. As I got up to get a refill on my coffee, I saw it. A single envelope, different from the rest. It was made of thick, expensive cream-colored paper, the kind my mother always used for her personal correspondence. There was no return address, but my name and our new Boston address were written on the front in her elegant, familiar looping cursive. My heart gave a single hard thump against my ribs, a jolt of alarm from a life I no longer lived. I picked it up. It felt heavy in my hand, heavy with the weight of unspoken words, of excuses, of justifications, of accusations I didn't want to hear. What could she possibly have to say to me now? Was she sorry? Was she angry? Did she want to blame me for blowing up her perfect, curated life? I stood there for a long time, just holding the letter, my thumb tracing the outline of my name. The old Alex, the boy who craved her approval more than air, would have torn it open in a heartbeat, desperate for any crumb of affection or remorse she might have thrown his way. But I wasn't that boy anymore. That boy had died in a hospital bed, staring at an empty chair. I thought about the years of neglect, the casual cruelty, the deep fundamental lie that had shaped my entire life. I thought about the empty hospital room and the cold, dismissive silence on the other end of the phone. I thought about the father I had almost lost, and the new life we were so carefully, so hopefully, building together, one pancake breakfast at a time. A single tear traced a hot path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness for her, or even for myself. It was a tear of grief, a final, quiet mourning for the family I had always wanted but never truly had. It was an acknowledgement of the loss, a letting go of the ghost of a mother I had carried with me for so long. Then, with a sense of calm I had never known before, I walked over to the small office nook my father had set up by the window. I didn't rip the letter. I didn't throw it in the trash. I slid it into the feed of the paper shredder. The machine whirred to life, its mechanical grinding the only sound in the quiet apartment. I watched as it pulled the letter in, devouring my mother's elegant handwriting, turning her words, whatever they were, into a cascade of meaningless, confetti-like strips of paper. The sound stopped. Silence returned. I turned away from the shredder and looked out the window again. The snow was falling faster now, blanketing the city, covering the old world and making everything new. And for the first time in my 28 years, I felt truly, completely free. Thank you for listening to my story. Wow. Just wow. I really need to take a deep breath after reading that one. That was an absolute emotional roller coaster, and to be completely honest, I am exhausted just experiencing it vicariously. The level of sociopathic detachment that mother had to abandon her own flesh and blood in an ICU bed while she catered to the whims of her cheating, spoiled golden child is something straight out of a psychological thriller. Seriously. OP's restraint is unbelievable. If it were me, I don't know if I would have had the cold, clinical patience to gather all that evidence. Putting that thick, pretentious letter from his mother right into the paper shredder at the very end was probably the most satisfying thing I've heard all year. He didn't even give her the satisfaction of being heard. Pure, brilliant closure. Let's see what the community had to say about this absolute hurricane of a family drama, because as you can imagine, the internet had a lot of opinions. A user named at Night Shift Hero commented, "As a fellow ER nurse, I am standing up and clapping for you and Jennifer right now. Jennifer is the real MVP here. The way she swiped that water bottle out of the trash was top-tier spy work." You survived a toxic family and a literal hit and run, and now you have a real father. You won. I completely agree, Night Shift Hero. We all need a friend like Jennifer in our corner. She saw through the mother's act immediately and didn't hesitate to help OP go scorched earth. She deserves a medal, honestly. However, not everyone is ready to hand out forgiveness so easily. User at Skeptical Mindset chimed in with a much harsher take, acting a bit like the devil's advocate here. They wrote, "I'm glad OP got away from his mom, but everyone is praising the dad way too much. He ignored his actual biological son for 28 years just because he was busy building an empire. Sorry, but being a CEO doesn't excuse abandoning your kid emotionally. He only bonded with OP because he realized his perfect son wasn't his. He's not exactly father of the year." Now that is a heavy point, and I can't say I entirely disagree. It's completely valid to point out that the dad was complicit through his chronic absence. He admitted he chose the path of least resistance because it was easier than facing his broken home. But on the flip side, people are flawed. When the veil was finally lifted, he completely dismantled his life, stepped down from the corporate rat race, and actually put in the work to build a real relationship with OP. It doesn't erase 28 years of neglect, but it proves he's willing to change. Is it too little? Too late? For OP, it seems like it was right on time. And finally, we have to talk about the financial side of this mess. User at JusticeSeeker99 pointed out, hold up, the mom embezzled over $1 million of marital funds over 18 years to pay off her baby daddy? That's not just grounds for divorce. That's massive financial fraud. Dad shouldn't have just kicked them out. He should be dragging her and Joseph through civil court to claw every single penny back. Make them pay. Honestly, Justice Seeker, my jaw dropped at the math on that too. $5,000 a month for 18 years? That is wild. I highly doubt the dad just let that go during the divorce settlement proceedings. He strikes me as a guy who knows how to ruin someone financially when provoked. The fact that the mom is now working a retail job at Nordstrom tells me she didn't get to keep a dime of that wealth. Karma hit her like a freight train. What do you guys think? Does the dad deserve total forgiveness for his past absence now that he's stepped up? And do you think OP should have read that final letter from his mother just to see what she had to say? Or was the shredder the right move? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this crazy story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Until next time, stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.
And that brings us to the end of things. Before you go, be sure that you like this video and you subscribe to the channel and ring that bell so that you never miss another great video like this one. See you next time.